you think, wow, at 21 years of age, you're 200 miles out over the Indian Ocean at 3 a.m, with shadowing a ship. I was in some examining role for 20 odd years, Sanjay, and that I really started to see the pressures that were on pilots. The assessments, the constant assessments that they were being put through, they stopped being a standards test and they became a pressure test. So we started these peer support networks for the pilot groups.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters. Your background career was in aviation, and as a result of that, you've created whole concepts around leadership at 43,000 feet. So let's begin with your career in aviation. How did you get into that? What did you do in that world, and what made you leave it?
It's great to be with you, Sanjay. It really is. It was either flying or it was join our family building business in architecture. So I started doing architecture, but I knew within 6 months that wasn't the right choice.
Right.
I had a family said, you back yourself. You do what you love to do, what you want to do, and have a go. And I did. And the great thing, Sanjay, was I had no idea really what was coming, and that was a great thing because you otherwise would just be living a script, And I learned to actually treasure that. And the more I got exposed to not knowing, the more I started to relish that, to be honest with you. So I learned to fly as a young person when I left university and privately here, which we often do. And my first real break in the light aircraft scene was the Australian Coast Watch system, which monitors the northern coastline, but we were the original ones back in 1980, so we had no good gear, no good electronics. And so it was very manual. And
what sort of things did you monitor on the coast?
Boats, mainly. Boats,
okay.
Aircraft. And we had approval to fly down to 100 feet, 30 metres, low-level flying. Special approval to do that so we could then capture boat registrations and movements. And we would, in those days, fax that or telex that back to the Coastal Surveillance Centre in Canberra, and then they could track that. It sounds very manual, but that's how it was. So that was right around the top end of Australia, and then I ended up in Western Australia with the Australian Customs contract, and there we really were chasing drug runners. That's what we were doing. Mm-hmm. So that was a wonderful experience, Sanjay, and honestly, I look back now and you think, wow, at 21 years of age, you're 200 miles out over the Indian Ocean at 3 a.m, with shadowing a ship. You handle that responsibility and think that, wow, it makes you, doesn't it, really? And so then in 1982, I joined the airline system, which is just a wonderful experience, to be honest, which was then Ansett Airlines, which like a lot of airlines, even the big ones, they fold sometimes, and that one did. So it wasn't all without interruption, that some people go through without any interruptions at all, but I had the odd company go broke or something would happen. But that just means you have to rebuild, and you learn what you're made of, don't you? Especially when you have children, and you just got to redo it. So that was a wonderful experience. It was through that time, to be honest with you, when I was in some examining role for 20 odd years, Sanjay, that I really started to see the pressures that were on pilots originally. And it was, what I observed, to be honest with you, was the assessments, the constant assessments that they were being put through. And I was one of the ones who were doing the examining.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped, in the wrong circumstances, they stopped being a standards test and they became a pressure test of the wrong kind. We know we want crew to be able to handle pressure, of course, but this was a different pressure. It was personal pressure, which really reflected potentially on their family because it was basically 2 goes and you're out. So the way you ran the assessment, what was vital in that area was crucial. And in our aircraft simulators, of course, they're just so advanced. You can really overstress anybody to an unreasonable extent, really. And pilots will often say, I prefer to have something go wrong in the airplane than in the simulator, because it wouldn't be just handling the aircraft, That was, I really recognised in those days in the team building atmosphere, how much I really loved just working with people. I really did. And then, that just expanded. And for the last 15 years of my airline career, I was moving heavily in that field across Australia, New Zealand, very heavily in Japan and Singapore and Vietnam. So,
right.
Yeah. The finish, you asked about my finish. That was a really big decision, a hard decision, Sanjay. It really was. But I consider myself fortunate because a lot of pilots don't get to make that conscious decision. So maybe it's a medical issue or something. So they don't know they've actually done their last flight, which is very sad because pilots love what they're doing. And it's a little bit like an artist not being able to paint again or a musician not being able to play music again. So,
right.
I made the decision because I had something else to progress on with, which didn't see me leaving my career in total. I was able to sort of take it with me, writing and presenting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So just stepping back then into the world of being a pilot, because that's kind of like the dream job for so many people I know. Certainly I would look at that and think, wow, you get to travel around the world, you get to fly these aircraft. But to the point you raised there, it is also quite a high pressure, right? Because you're responsible for 300 people, 400 people in your aircraft. You've got the crew, you've got all these other things, the weather, the fuel, all of those aspects. So how, as a pilot, or how do you handle all of those different elements that are coming at you? Sometimes quite fast, right? And the decision has to be made pretty quickly.
Yes, it's such a great question and topic you raised, Sanjay, because in the days before September 11 happened, we were able to take family and even some friends in the flight deck with us. I remember on two different occasions, I took two friends that both happened to be doctors, friends, family friends, and they both made the same comment separate times. And they said, the difference between you and us is that we get to sit and think to work out what we need to do, that you are time limited and it doesn't stop. You've got air traffic control and weather and everything else going on, and you've got limited fuel. So that's it. Everything you said is correct. So, but the issue that arises here really is if you're fortunate, like me, we used to spend about 10 years as second in command, and you're able to learn from those people and pick out the best of them if you're fortunate. These days, the growth is so fast that there's so many jobs around, Sanjay, that they don't get that privilege, really. It's a few years and you're in command, So we've tried to accelerate that experience learning. I remember a particular captain I flew with, so I was in my 20s at the time, and I said to him, gee, I was actually happy that I wasn't in the position of having to make the final decision then. He appreciated that comment, but he also said, but Chris, remember, the more you're exposed to it, the more those big decisions start to shrink a little bit for you. It's not a case of devaluing them, but by experience, you get to be able to manage more and more, as it comes, and to cull out the things that don't matter, to learn how to really triage, as you need to do at times. And you are right again. It doesn't escape me that we have 300 people, or whatever it may be. We might have 6 people in light aircraft. It's still the same, but you've got those people trusting you. Sanjay, I used to love taking on the midnight flights at 3 a.m, putting on one of those puffer jackets, and we all have them, putting them on, and I'd walk down the cabin incognito, and I'd go back there, and you'd walk past all the people. They're either sleeping or watching a movie or something. The kids would be there. I was very quiet. I'd go down the back to talk to the cabin crew to check on them because I really need them for when things don't go right. And that was, and I recommended that to everybody. You just go to have a look at those people back there. Don't forget, behind that locked flight deck door, you've got those human beings there trusting you, and you'll be putting your family on another flight and you want them to trust those pilots too. So you just can't lose sight of that, Sanjay. You really can't.
No. So how do you, when pilots going through training, just back to what you said about the simulator, you can really like go to the extreme almost in some of these scenarios that you play out in there. How do you avoid pilots burning out with stress or coming to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore? In that whole process, it sounds like, because for me, right, I'm a passenger, I've traveled a fair amount, I look at it and it looks easy and straightforward. And nowadays with computers and everything, you kind of think, well, okay, what does the pilot really do? But of course, the pilot does a lot and is responsible for you. But with that comes the mental pressure and the pressure people put on themselves. So how, from your own experiences and what you learned, how do pilots avoid that burnout? Or do a lot of pilots burn out? Maybe they do. I don't know.
Some do. Some do.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some on the odd occasion ask me to stop the simulator because I can't do it anymore. I've had that happen. And really it was a result of a poor experience by an examiner, really. You can really influence the way that is going just by your demeanor. You're sitting behind them, Sanjay, but they can feel it. It could be just the clicking of your pen. If someone has a bad habit of doing that, it could be as simple as that to be really off-putting to someone, and how you debrief and how you handle a changeover in between the sequences that you're assessing. The answer is yes to all of that. And how do they manage that stress? That is why I got into that, and therefore we now start training the examiners, where there's things have altered to some degree, to a significant degree, but it's a bit of a cultural issue too, Sanjay, because in certain cultures there's a very steep flight deck gradient. No matter what, if you're senior, what you say goes, and that's all there is to it. There's got to be a certain gradient to the left-hand seat, the captain's seat, but we aim for a shallow one. Someone's got to be able to take responsibility ultimately, but we have to have the other person capable of speaking up and disagreeing or raising a point, even if they may be wrong. It doesn't matter. If you've got a concern, you've just got to raise this, and there's no offence taken with this. There is a certain element of fun. I wouldn't call it desensitization, but the experience of being assessed does help you. The more you do it, the more you can cope with it. But you can go past that peak. You really can. Mm-hmm. And I guess the part for me towards the end was I still miss flying, but I don't miss the work part that went with it, Sanjay. Those assessments, you just get to that point. So we started these peer support networks for the pilot groups specifically, and we found really that there was such commonality, and this is going back 15 years. Commonality amongst pilot groups. And what I found really interesting was in Japan, when we went there, I would say to you, the sub sort of 45-year-olds were really keen to, one, keep their culture, but two, grab a hold of some of that leveling of the gradient, because in Asia it can be very steep. And be able to speak up somewhat. So that took a couple of years to gain acceptance of that program in Asia. Mm-hmm. But we persisted up there, and I remember saying to the CEO at the time, this could take a while to really take on, but I couldn't have been more wrong, Sanjay. Within the first year, it just accelerated. It really did. They felt safe to actually speak up, and within those groups, we would bring senior people in, junior people in, so there was no status. That was not allowed in the room. And I really admire the people who were able to leave their status at the door. That's not an easy thing to do when you're not used to it.
No, and you touch on something there. Coming from an Asian background myself, there's a deference to authority that's kind of built into you from a very young age. So I can imagine in the Japanese airline that you were working with, if that translated into the cockpit, and as you say, the gap between the first in command and second in command is quite high. So the leaving your ego, for want of a better way of putting it, at the door when you come into the workshop, that must have been very, very difficult for some of them to do, right? What was the thing that made them accept and kind of embrace what you were saying?
The program we ran was called the Trust Program, which I think is a really good name. It literally took a couple of years, Sanjay, because I had to expose myself to all of those people within those managerial ranks and through the rest of the airline, not just through the pilot group, to trust me. And to trust me that I wasn't in there to tell them what to do, wasn't there to change their culture, wasn't there to say you must do it this way. It took a couple of years for them to trust me that I wasn't going to do that. And I did discover that in those cultures, which I really enjoyed. And we can learn a lot from some of those cultures too. That once you've got their trust, you've really got it. That's what I found. They really went with you. But okay, I'm going to give this a go, and to really acknowledge them and their decency for doing this. So there was no pushing and shoving, Sanjay. And in fact, as I've come back from Japan, I'd call into Singapore, where there was a company there. I'd show my wares, and for the first couple of years, they said, no, we don't need that. We don't need that. It's fine. I just kept on calling it. Then one day they phoned up and said, will you come and do it? So there's another example. And the Singapore company was very multicultural. I think there are about 6 nationalities there. So that was really something to work with. Whereas in Japan, it was primarily Japanese.
Right. Okay. So how did you, is there a particular, set of methodologies or models that you would apply to build trust in those sorts of scenarios? Or was it just by virtue of your personality, which I can imagine people, based on just our conversations that we've had in before and now, people just gravitate towards you and they trust you based on your personality. Was it that, or was it something else as well that you applied to that?
Well, thank you. That was very kind of you to say that, and I genuinely appreciate it, Sanjay. And I think I was looking for certain traits in our peer supporters, and I've got to say to you, the number one trait was humility. Absolutely number one trait. And I look for that in leaders, to be honest, because, and I use this other word carefully, but humility is power. But it's better than power. It's actually more influence. And yes, there is a template, but which involves the interviews, the training, and all of those sorts of things, and how to handle the issues like depression, anxiety, to recognise things, self-awareness, a whole lot of factors involved in this, and the things that would degrade mental health and engagement and respect on a daily basis too, not just the other mental health issues we talk about. But I was really looking for people who had that humility and they weren't in it for themselves, because ultimately, Sanjay, people will pick up on it. If they see that the manager or the peer supporter is actually in it for their own glory or something, they pick up on that, and they'll think, hang on, this is about me. It's actually not about you, So humility is the one, and humility is the key to having people open up to you. That they will then speak to you and tell you those things that they wouldn't otherwise. That they'll do that because they start to trust you and respect your role in this. Mm-hmm. And as a peer, of course, then you've got that credibility of having done what they've done and been there themselves. So I learned so much in that, Sanjay, because after some years, initially I thought, this is good. About 83% of the respondents who were approaching peer supporters for assistance actually knew of the supporter or knew them. And we were celebrating that for a while. Then I had a good think about it. I thought, no, I don't think that's right. You learn that figure should be down, because what you want is for everybody to approach the system and trust anyone who's associated with the system. So that's what made me think more broadly, just through street wisdom, I guess, no, I need to get that figure down so people trust the program.
Right. And trust is linked to a word you used a fair bit in our preparation calls, which is iconic. And we were talking about iconic brands and iconic systems and how you look to help companies think about being iconic. So can we explore a bit around that? Sydney Opera House was an example you gave last time, right? What makes that iconic? That's
right, because it's whether it's a person or a physical structure or an organization, because it genuinely stands for something, and not just anything, but has to be something that the other people value. And the Sydney Opera House, apart from being what I think is a beautiful building, Sanjay, here, the population here has really taken moral ownership of that building. Even if they haven't been to it, they'll defend it because of what goes on inside of that building. It's not just opera, it's rock and roll, and it's all sorts of plays and everything. And on the steps, there are things put on the steps. They project important images up onto the sails of that building. But we all feel we've got a personal stake in that building, because we just love it. And the thing about that, in my view, Sanjay, is that there's no cost in this. So you could have a really great company, be commercially enormously successful, Amazon, Facebook, whatever they are, or the telcos, the airlines, and still not be iconic in my view, because they don't stand for something that the staff and the public want to own, So, for example, Qantas here, we like to go, it's safe, it's a piece of home, it's our soil, that's how you want to think of it. So if it's not representing that, we get a bit upset with it, because this is ours. And there's no cost to this. So but the great thing about being iconic, Sanjay, is it pushes through the tough times. Whereas an organization that is commercially very successful can also not be commercially successful. It can, or it could be sold, and the staff and the public wouldn't. Well, who really cares? It doesn't matter. Someone else owns it. News Corp or someone else owns it. But if an icon is sold, we think, hang on, I don't think I like that. We've got some moral ownership, skin in the game here.
Yeah, I suppose the iconic piece around. You've mentioned Qantas there. I think of British Airways here in the UK as having had that iconic status, which has somewhat got diluted because of some of the actions around that. Versus in Europe, Ryanair is the biggest low-cost airline, and it's an iconic brand insofar as it's Ryanair, and everyone knows Ryanair. But do people feel ownership of it? Do they feel attached to it? No, because the way you have to, the airline ticket might be €29 or whatever, but then you have to add this, you have to add that, and then you've forgotten your boarding pass, you have to go and pay for the boarding pass. It's just like the whole experience is so poor that you're not going to be wedded to it in the same way you would to an airline like Qantas or British Airways.
There you go. And isn't it interesting, Sanjay, that's such a great example. With Qantas is now, it's not government owned anymore, it's owned by organisations and total, but we still consider it the people's carrier. It's still our carrier. Yet it's publicly owned, or just anyone owns it, And there is a difference, isn't it, between just hunting for a share price and profit figures. So whereas staff, and Qantas went through this in recent times, it became too much that way, and the staff were a bit put off about that, but they've got the message now, and people won't be happy just because they're making massive profits or whatever it may be. They want to come to work for a reason. I think we're seeing a decline in the in the purely commercially oriented leadership styles now. People want more, and that's fine. That's more than fine. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Good thing.
So leadership at 43,000 feet, it's primarily based around the work in the airline industry. And do you just work with the airline industry, or do you now have you expanded that to work with other organizations?
Yes, I'm very, very happy, Sanjay, because that work now goes across to legal and psychology and mental health and psychology conferences and so forth, and the transport sector and others. I really love that because there are things we can learn from each other all the way. But there's so many things that I've been so fortunate to learn. And so the book is my experience. It's basically an autobiographical leadership book.
Right.
And I originally wrote it because I wanted my kids to learn a bit more about what I've done, because there's always more to mum and dad than they know. Not to tell them what to do, but in case they recognise certain circumstances in themselves through their life, it made me think, okay, I get that now.
Right. Okay. So it was almost like writing your memoirs for your kids, but in the process it became a book that any business leader, anyone who's interested in leadership could.
Yes, that's right. And I wanted to move from one career of love to another, which was writing and working with companies on organisational matters. So it was a great segue through that period. I just love the writing, and book 2's underway now because this one's gone well enough that the sequels it's going quite well. Sanjay, I'm very happy. So it seems to be striking a chord, and I'm just loving that. Moving into something else. I remember you and I were speaking briefly once before. I really respect, and one of my heroes is David Attenborough, from your country, because I think the world has taken moral ownership of David Attenborough,
Yes.
He's iconic, but he's lived his life for a purpose, beautiful purpose, and here he is in his 90s, global respect for good things, so I'm not matching myself there by any stretch, but it was a great example of how you can live your life, move to something else you love doing, and keep going.
Right. Yes. Live your life with a purpose. That's really important.
Yes.
As you know, the podcast series is called Success Matters. So what does success mean for you?
It's such a great topic, and it's now my phase of life. It's an even better one. To me, it's making the world a better place as best I can to play a part in doing that, feeling that I'm doing something valuable if I'm speaking with organisations or anybody, just that you're really playing a part and they're valuing what you are saying, and genuinely, not just words, that you should give them something that you think will be helpful. And I think, of course, good friends, good family, family safe and all those sorts of things. Having an interesting life as an individual, and I think from a work point of view, gaining the respect of the majority. I think, Sanjay, I think
okay,
gaining the respect of the majority of people, and I think that's really important to think. Okay, well, rather than just a handful at the top of the org charts sort of thing. So, at all level, I think that's really important to me.
Okay, all right. So respect, friends and family, and making the world a better place.
Yeah, that's it.
And in terms of making the world a better place, are there other things you do, things like charity or other work that helps towards that?
Yes, I was set a very good example, Sanjay, by my parents, because they've passed on now. However, they showed us how to have of course, your career, good family, but to contribute back to society as well. They really did that well, and here we are, what we witness to, aren't we? Sometimes, and they contributed through their various charitable causes. For me, I'm certainly I still do my remote and individual counselling with people and groups,
right? And
I really enjoy that. I really get a lot out of talking with people and hopefully finding some solutions there. My real I often ask people, what they think of the biggest problems are. And they ask me what mine is. And I think the biggest problem, and it's the issue I work with heavily now, is argument, that damaging, destructive, pointless argument that occurs in families, in workplaces, and globally.
Mm-hmm.
It just stops good things from happening.
Right.
So my real bent is to try and help people overcome that and try and reduce the amount of that occurs. And I honestly believe that's my real commitment, Sanjay. I honestly believe we'd only have to reduce that by 5 or 10% and the world would change. I really do. We'd start solving a lot of the things that seem insolvable, but they're actually not. We just need to,
I think,
learn to accept others' point of view.
The challenge, I suppose, we have is in the political sphere. Argument and cultural wars are part of the way in which the political sphere is operating at the moment. So actually conflict is, to an extent, what they're looking to actually bring about, right? Rather than necessarily compromise and agreeing a common way forward. So against that backdrop, I can imagine that, individuals then are going through a kind of similar process and maybe not willing to give an inch, if you like, or whatever the right expression is. So how do you handle, or when someone says to you, okay, I'm, I don't know, falling out with my work colleagues or whatever, what's the advice you would give to them?
Yes. And some of it, it's a lot of self-awareness sitting in here, Sanjay. It really is.
Yeah.
And so that we have a bit of a look at ourselves and honestly, or a real good look at ourselves, even if we don't want to verbalize it. And what's the emotion that's driving me in this conflict? What actually is doing this? Am I jealous, angry? Am I insecure? What actually am I really? And then someone sometimes has got to be, if you like, the hero and say, well, I accept your right to your view. And I actually give them some mechanical techniques, Sanjay. For example, that one, it's what I call the paradox. So the moment you say to someone, even if their view is totally counter to yours, you might find it obnoxious. But if I say to that person, I accept your right to your view, that's the moment you've created the opportunity for them to work with you, because they'll feel, okay, some element of respect or, decency, we can actually maybe come to some solution. So the paradox is a big one. Another one I use, say to them, well, if someone is affecting you, it tells you more about you than them. Because it doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means maybe you've reached the limit with that person or the issue, or maybe you need to hand over to someone else, and maybe you need some help yourself. So it doesn't mean you're wrong. They may be still a very difficult person, but what we're after is a solution. We want an answer here. We can give.
Okay, that makes sense. So one of the traditions I have, which I borrowed from another podcast series, is to ask a previous guest for a question for my next guest. So my last guest asked, if you could spend the rest of your life doing something that makes you deliriously happy, what would you be doing?
Oh, this is so great. It really is. It would be continuing a lot of what I do, continuing to write and talking with people and having great friends. So I know they'll want a more specific one than that. I'd say continuing to write. And continue to write. Yeah, it is. Yeah, continue to write, and also I would like to start moving into writing novels as well. So that would be my succinct answer, Sanjay, to that. Yes.
Okay. I mean, so based on what we were talking just now in our conversation, I did think you're already doing probably what makes you happy. Well, the delirious bit was the bit I was looking for. So writing is writing is your thing.
Yeah, we have that. I have this dream. I'm going to make it a reality next year, Sanjay. I want to go to Italy. I've got some young friends in Italy there. Park myself in some beautiful little village somewhere and just write for a month or two, and live the life, Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your part of the world, that mightn't seem so. That's a big dream, but from here it is. I would just love to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. 2025.
It's a dream, even living in Europe, to go to Italy and spend a month or two in a beautiful little village with lovely food, overlooking the Mediterranean, lovely weather. I went to Italy actually in the summer this year, and the Amalfi Coast is beautiful, and it's just such a lovely vibe. So it's a great dream, and I can, as you were talking, I was just picturing you sitting there, maybe at a little cafe, the little table outside on a cobbled street, right, with your notebook. It's just, I've drawn the image, so I'm looking forward to seeing pictures of that when you actually do that in 2025.
That's a deal. Okay.
Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yes. My question would be, what, in your view, is the world's biggest problem? And if you had all the power of the world, what would you do about it? That'd be my question.
What's the world's biggest problem? And if you had all the power in the world, what would you do about it?
Exactly.
Okay. And what would your answer be to that, Chris?
To me, the world's biggest problem is argument. That's what it is. That's
right.
It's argument. And that pointless argument, I would be educating and hopefully moving some way to that point now, but educating younger people and not so younger people techniques to actually reduce it, to get you'll never eliminate it, but people use words as weapons even, Sanjay, don't they? They throw words back at people and they start looking at their intent, these sorts of things. So really educating people, maybe the next generation of younger people, how to be more accepting, and really I think we can change the world like that. That's, I'm an optimist, but that's what I think.
How do we handle the people's egos in that sort of conversation? Because often ego is what drives that whole piece, right?
Yeah, and that's the self-awareness issue, and which was part of that program I like to work with companies doing now. So which emanated from the peer support networks that became those forums that I run, where there is no status. We had even the CEO, heads of departments, I would politely oblige them to come along and then ask and talk about subjects that would degrade engagement and mental health and cultural integrity every day. Those topics, right, are not the normal ones. They're things like exaggerating, groupthink, all that sort of thing, such that people are actually looking at themselves a bit in the audience and thinking, well, maybe I'm doing that. Maybe if I exaggerate, it's quite damaging to this person. Maybe I'm a talker about someone and they're not looking at me very in a good light because they'll be thinking, I'm the talker here. So, it's a lot of self-awareness in there. And I think that's the way, it's a slow process really, but actually, you know what? It's not that slow. I'll take that back, because I find some really quick changes in people when they attend those forums. And for people, I really want people who aspire to management to attend those forums at the lower level and then take that culture up with them. So we change the culture from below in that way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the way.
Okay, great. So we're coming towards the end of our time now, Chris. If people want to get in touch with you or find out more about what you do, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yes, I have a website, and it's aculturalleadership.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. People do want a book. Actually, you can order it through those mediums, or all through my website. If people would like to do that, I can send the book myself. So it's mainly that way.
Okay.
Through LinkedIn primarily, Sanjay.
Yeah. All right. Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the conversation today and the insights into the world of pilots and flying, which, for me, it's something that I know nothing about, because you get on a plane, the door is shut, maybe the door is open, you might see the captain maybe walking up and down every now and again, but the bits behind that, right? The work, the mental stress, the training, everything that goes on behind that. For me, this was a very interesting conversation, because I had no exposure to that. And then the work that you're doing to support pilots and captains that are going, through what could be a stressful training period and a stressful period. So thank you very much for your conversation today, Chris.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.